Okay, well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Breakout Session 2B, AMS Data Visualizations. My name is Levi Geyer. I'm an Assistant Field Chief for the Livestock, Poultry, and Market News Division. I'll be presenting for this session, and just a reminder, this session is recorded. Closed captioning is available through the toolbar below, as well as any Q&As or questions that you want to submit for answer either during this presentation or afterwards. So I'd like to begin with a statement that I probably picked up from some Netflix series that goes along the lines of the only thing more valuable than money is information. And to be honest, I think it's fitting for this entire webinar. Information allows us to make good, prudent marketing decisions. It allows us to mitigate risk, and ultimately just boils down to making good decisions. So the more information we have available, the more things that we can do with it. Now, the private sector has seen the value in information for many years. That's why they package it up. That's why they market it. That's why they charge people for access to that information. But the government has done the same thing. It has invested in multiple programs through USDA to provide data free and available to the public. And one portion of that data source is our market news programs under AMS. Now, as we've grown throughout the last 100 years, we provided a lot of different reports. We've always done a tremendous job in collecting data. And historically, we packaged this data into static reports to help people analyze and kind of make sense of the information. But as we've grown through the history of our existence, you know, we've had well over 1,000 reports across multiple market news divisions. And as you can imagine, trying to access the information in which your source or what you're seeking can be rather cumbersome at times. So over the last couple of years, we've invested quite a bit of resources into providing data visualization tools to make this user experience a little bit easier trying to source the information that folks are seeking. So what I'm here to present today is one of our dashboards. It's one of several dashboards that we produce, and we continue to develop additional ones. The one I'm going to demonstrate today covers livestock auction markets. And I think it's a good depiction of what's available out there and what the potential is for other commodities that we can bring into these dashboards. So to begin, I'm going to start with the landing page that we have for this dashboard. Now, we develop these dashboards using Tableau. Tableau is a data visualization software that allows us to tap into our millions of records of data and then bring them to life. So that's what we're going to display moving forward. And please submit any of your questions to the Q&A. We will try to get to them in this session. And if not in this session, then in tomorrow's panel. So on this landing page, we have an overview of market information across the United States. These are areas in which we provide market reporting services for. As you notice, we're not in all states, but we're in a pretty large majority of the states across the U.S. And it just kind of gives us a pulse of what's going on across the U.S. Now, we refine this down because, as anybody that's in the cattle sector know, there's a lot of value difference depending on the age or production status of a particular animal. So we took the most popular livestock commodity that's marketed, that being feeder cattle, and we tightened up the weight parameters to 550 to 750 pounds. That's where the bulk majority of our feeder cattle are being marketed across the U.S. And this kind of gives us a depiction of what's going on as far as current market conditions. So this price chart is this price visualization is a 2-week rolling average. And as you notice, there's quite a bit of price discrepancy between the regional variances across the U.S. And as you notice, excuse me, folks, my screen went blank there. Okay. As you notice across this, you're seeing much higher prices up in the northern plains than what you would see in the southeast. And there's a number of factors behind that, and we really don't have the time today in this discussion to go into that, but we can certainly have further discussions later on. But you will notice as you hover over a state, it does give you a breakdown of all the markets that are contributing information into that overall state weighted average price. So if you're marketing cattle in Nebraska, you can see that there's multiple markets that we provide price discovery for that kind of give you an understanding of what the current market conditions are for feeder cattle. Now we can refine this map even further, and I'll get into that in a little bit later in this session, and we can kind of drill down in with a little more precise factors and filters to kind of get information that people are seeking. But before we get to that particular aspect of this dashboard, I want to go up to the cattle overview. Now, the cattle overview more or less provides just kind of that 30,000-foot view of the cattle markets, all encompassing. And you'll notice on this particular page, we have multiple filters that you can drill down to refine the data even further. But just starting out, we're going to pull up the last 180 days. And to the top left, we have a geographical overlay of all the markets across the U.S. that we are reporting livestock information upon. And if you hover over any of those particular dots, it'll actually give you the market location as well as the name of the market. So that forms as kind of a directory, and we have a little bit more detailed directory in a later tab. In the next segment is our total receipts. It kind of gives a running tally of how many receipts we've reported. And overall, within a year's scope of time, we oftentimes get just shy of 13 million head, which is a pretty good data set by anybody's standards. As you come over to the top right of this visualization, you'll notice we have a table here, and it gives you an overview of all the different market classes and the weighted average price for those markets. Now, we can drill down into this table further to get more refined information. And as you see, I went from the commodity class, breaking feeder cattle and slaughter cattle, into individual classes for bulls, steers, heifers, so forth and so on. And if we continue to drill in, we'll get more and more detailed information on each of these classes of livestock, as well as their reflective prices, of weighted average prices, for the parameters that we set up on top. Now, as you can tell, this gets a little bit busy. It's hard to read scrolling through this. We did consider this, so we have the ability to export any particular portion of this visualization at this download summary data. And what this allows us to do is to actually bring this information into an Excel file so that you can then do further analysis on the data. And you can run it through your own pivot tables or whatever you'd like to do that Excel is capable of doing. So this is the particular table we were just expanding earlier. Going back to our visual, the bottom left, yes?
I think you were showing that spreadsheet, but the screen share is still stuck on your visualization if you were trying to show the spreadsheet.
I apologize.
And just while he's pulling up, that download summary that Levi just mentioned, it will actually download the pieces for every segment that you see on this particular page, not just one section.
And just so you guys can see what that looks like, here's the Excel format. As Michael mentioned, every segment of that page, there's a different tab. So your report count, your market map with all your coordinates, your receipts table, and your weighted average table, which we were expanding earlier. And again, this just allows the user the ability to dig into this information a little bit further and further analyze it. Okay, running back to this visual, on the bottom left, we provided a simple line chart. And essentially what this is mapping out is our lighter weight calves, as well as our heavier weight yearlings. And that's depicted through weight ranges from 400 to 600 pounds and 600 to 900 pounds. Now, we went ahead and brought in a line for the price of corn because these two commodities oftentimes will have an inverse relationship. As corn goes down, oftentimes feeder cattle prices will go up because it's cheaper to feed them. That does have, we do have to take that information with a grain of salt, because as we know, we're kind of in a contracted phase of our cattle herd, our cattle inventory, and part of the rise in feeder cattle prices has to do with the reduction in inventory, but it also has, the price of corn also plays into that. So that's that particular chart. The chart to the bottom right, it maps out our slaughter cow values, so more or less the salvage value of those cows after they're out of production. Again, we have the relationship of volume as it relates to the price for cull cows. This is not a typical chart that we would see historically. Oftentimes, we will see a rise in volume marketed of cows as we enter the fall, as we saw last year here. But due to the reduction in supply of cattle to market, we're not seeing that rise as much as we would in typical years. At the very top is a market count. We currently are in 256 markets across the United States, and we develop roughly 324 reports from those markets. At any point in any of these visualizations, we have a return to the main dashboard. Is probably the easiest thing to kind of go back from the beginning and navigate to a new tile. We developed a similar overview for the sheep overview. As I open this up, you can see it's quite similar to the cattle overview. We did change the chart slightly down below, but these top segments of the visualization are the same. We still have the same weighted average table, the total receipts, as well as the geographical overlay of the market locations across the United States. Filters are the same. You can kind of refine this information by state. If you're interested in only particular reports, you can hit any of these drop downs and filter by the reports in which you want to access. The slug ID, I will get into this in a little bit more detail. Each report has its own unique ID number, and that comes in helpful for some of our heavy data users that are wanting to run APIs to our database, but it also helps us to identify individual reports. They correspond with the report titles, and we have a directory for all that. I'll show that to you in just a minute. The only thing different on this visualization is the chart below. Here we mapped out market lamb prices, and there's a big growing trend in hair lambs and people and producers raising hair lambs. So we went ahead and put two lines of data here, one marking the wool lambs, the other one depicting the market information on the hair lambs and how they relate. The bars at the bottom are just volume indicators, so week-to-week volume that's been marketed over the last 365 days. The goat overview, again, very similar to the cattle and sheep. The top segment's the exact same. The only difference is the graph below. The lines along this graph depict slaughter kids, lightweight slaughter kids between 30 and 60 pounds, as well as heavyweight slaughter kids between 60 and 90 pounds, and slaughter nannies. One thing to note on this particular chart, goats are marketed in various different forms and fashions. Some folks market them on estimated weights by the head, some on actual weights by the head, others by hundredweight with actual weights. So we took all those factors, and in order to compare apples to apples, we brought them and converted them all to a dollar per head figure. So this way we can have comparative analysis across multiple regions. I mentioned the slug IDs in some of those overviews. This serves as our directory of all the reports that we issue in all the locations. So we color coded this map so you don't get confused with some of these markets that are close to state boundaries. Again, if you hover over any of the particular dots, it'll give you that location. To the right is our directory. It breaks it by state and every market that we report within that state. Beside that is a column for the slug ID. Again, this is a unique identification number for each report, as well as the title of the report. Again, as with all these visualizations, you can export this information into an Excel file for easier reading if necessary. The slug IDs, the biggest thing with the slug ID is it helps you pull that information much more quickly if you want to access our database and pull, individual sets of data that are specific to one particular market. All right, so I went over a few broad overviews of market information. And again, it wasn't very refined, but we're going to dig in a little bit deeper here. So we provided some additional tools to refine the data even further. And we spent quite a bit of time over the past couple of years visiting with industry and marketing associations to kind of understand what their needs were and what the producers' needs were, as far as what we could build into this visualization that would be useful to the everyday producer, all the way up to your large cattle feeders. So some of these advanced tiles here allows us to refine the data even further. And it really kind of tells a nice story of what's going on across the market and how different factors can influence value. So the first one that I pulled up is a just generic class comparison. So within feeder cattle, we break things into class. We break them into steers, heifers, bulls, dairy steers, dairy heifers, and some feeding cows. Now, obviously, there's a lot of difference between each of those classes, and this helps kind of bring it to life and provides a really nice visual. One thing that we hear all the time, mostly through extension and folks that are offering BQA certifications, is the value of castrating your bulls for marketing purposes to make them steers. And oftentimes you get rebuttals from producers that it isn't worth the effort to go through and castrate. And really, the proof is in the data. And just coming into this at a 600-pound animal, now we're filtered on the last 180 days here, but we can go out further. And I'm going to actually run a custom year-to-date figure. So when I hit custom on the filter, I'm going to come in here and type my date at January 1st of 23, and that's going to give me a year-to-date figure across all the states we cover. As this updates, we can see a pretty stark difference of roughly, $40 a hundredweight difference between our bull and steers within the 600-pound class. So to some folks, that might not be worth their effort, but for folks that want to add several $100s to their marketing, I would say that it's oftentimes is worth the effort in cutting calves. We also see the difference in the value of heifers comparative to steers. Another valuable point of information. A lot of folks are interested on how far back heifers are being priced in relationship to steers. Steers will oftentimes, outperform heifers in the feedlots, hence the reason that there's a higher value on them. So this particular chart just kind of brings that to life and gives a quick understanding of the value differences between each of the classes. Going one step further from that comprehensive analysis between the classes, we dug specifically into feeder cattle because there's multiple factors that will influence value on feeder cattle, and a lot of different production practices that can be implemented that will either increase or decrease the value of feeder cattle being marketed. So this is one portion that we developed based on quite a bit of industry feedback, and we see a lot of value in it because it really tells the story of value differences within the same animal. So we can refine this data a little bit based on the state and location, but the information really comes into this table on our weight breaks and some of the different production practices or marketing practices that may be implemented. So across, we already had the class comparison, but we brought in some of the comments that we mark when we do the data collection on feeder cattle on whether cattle are fleshy or thin flesh. That means the degree of fat in which they're carrying, or if they're full, or if they qualify for natural or NHTC. So NHTC being non-hormone treated cattle. And through this, we come to understand that there's a lot of value difference within these particular practices. Again, I'm going to refine this data a little bit because we have a pretty large scope of time here. So I'm going to run year-to-date figures. And and we'll go ahead and use the entire US data set. But looking at this and the analysis of it just on fleshy cattle, if we're looking at particularly thin flesh cattle comparative to fleshy cattle, you know, we're seeing a pretty significant price difference of a little less than $40 per hundredweight or 40 cents per pound. Again, if you're marketing a full load, 50,000 pounds of cattle, 40 cents a pound adds up pretty quickly on those two different factors. The other item that was of quite a bit of interest was NHTC, non-hormone treated cattle. There's a lot of specialty programs that you can market through for all natural, you know, non-hormone treated cattle. And in that, you know, one thing that a producer has to make a decision upon is whether it's worth it not to put growth promotants into their cattle. And, you know, the money has to be there because you're not going to have as efficient rate of gain as those cattle that are implanted. But just looking at the rough figures here between cattle that have nothing marked beside them at 218 comparative to those that are naturals, you know, we're seeing a pretty significant about $20, $23 per hundredweight difference between those two animals. So this allows our producer to come back and kind of make their decision on whether they would choose to implant cattle or not implant cattle based on the potential market price that they could be receiving. The next segment of this dashboard, it's going to take this main visualization that we have here and allow us to refine it even further. So if we bring this up, we have still the same geographical overlay of market information across the United States. Again, you can hover over any particular state and get a rundown of all the markets that fed into that overall statewide weighted average. Again, we have the filters up here to modify your date parameters. So you can take any scope in time. Maybe you're interested in the fall quarter of 2022, or maybe you're interested on how data compares back to 2018 or 2019. We've witnessed different things within the cattle cycles that have influenced price. So this allows you to kind of hone in on a particular portion of time without having to dig up all these archived reports. Again, I want to run just a year-to-date average. And as we refine this information a little bit further, we get an updated picture of market values across the U.S. Now, I'm looking at solely feeder cattle on this particular visual. One weight group that most people are interested on feeder cattle marketing is what's reflective of the CME index. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange produces a feeder cattle index in which they settle their cash settled contracts for feeder futures. And those weight depictions, even though they do have additional parameters, but for weight, that value is reflective of a steer between 700 and 900 pounds. So even though we're not replicating this exactly, because they also use some of our frame and muscle scores, we can at least look at the weight parameters in a rough comparative analysis. And if we look at those 700 to 900 pound steers, which the feeding industry tends to source for going into the feedlot, that's kind of their ideal weight for entering the feedlot, we can see quite a bit of variance in price across the United States. Now, looking at the clock, I do have a little extra time to explain what all this information means, so I'm going to take advantage of that. But we see a large price difference from the east and into the northern plains. And part of that has to do with the feeding locations. Most of your major feedlots across the U.S. are located in the high plains. So the panhandle of Texas through Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Colorado. So there's a freight difference between these two. So any cattle marketed down in the southeast are oftentimes trucked to the west in order to enter feedlots. And if anybody's checked the price of fuel lately, it's rather high. So that diesel cost to move those cattle across the country or into the middle of the country, it ends up pulling down about $10 per hundredweight off of a load. So we could see why part of these animals down here are selling about roughly $10 per hundredweight back from what we're seeing in the plains. So that has a large, that's a large portion of why the cattle are a little bit cheaper in the Southeast comparative to the plains. We also see differences in production practices. Most of your herds, cow-calf herds throughout the plains are larger, and they can market larger groups. And because they can market full load lots, there's more value to that as well. So that's some of the explanation as well as to why we're seeing higher prices, more so in the plains than we do in the East. But either way, it's a good way to, understand the market information that's coming across in these reports. We don't have it just for cattle. We can also look at our sheep markets or our goat markets. And excuse me real quick because I got to clear out some of these filters here. Michael, do you understand why this is not giving me the commodity? Oh, here it is. It's because I refined it to steers. Unfortunately, there are no steers when we talk about sheep. Only wethers. So again, this gives us the same visualization based on multiple classes. If we want to refine just to our hair varieties of lambs and our wool varieties of lambs, we can apply those additional filters and pull that market information absent of the lower value of ewes and bucks or more mature stock. So again, it's a pretty valuable tool in just getting kind of an overview of the market conditions across the U.S. within any particular span of time. Going back to the main dashboard, auction receipts. Most of our states have different marketing divisions, and they're always interested in the volume of livestock being marketed throughout their states. And it's just a interesting piece altogether. So this maps out how much of the trade we're actually capturing, how much percentage of the marketing that we're actually seeing. So if we come in here, and I'm going to select all years so we have a comparative analysis year to year. And again, we can refine this further by state, but this is overall across the nation where we're currently collecting market data. And as mentioned earlier, we kind of come in around 12.5 to 13 million head of receipts that we cover and that we report upon. The bulk majority of these are feeder cattle, about 9.5 million head are feeder cattle. And overall, you can come down to the additional classes of sheep and goats and swine, and you can see kind of the volume difference year over year. Now, again, this is just the markets that we're in. All this is done through voluntary reporting. So there's no mandate that requires people to submit this information to us. So you do have to consider that. This probably is not a complete census like NASS would run. This is more or less us having the manpower through cooperative agreements with the state to collect this market information through the livestock markets that are allowing us to report. The next visual that I'm pulling up here, we developed this so that people can more or less mimic some of our static reports and customize them to what they're interested in. So it allows for some additional filters. So in this, if I'm interested again in just kind of what has gone on over the past month, I can set my filters to the last 30 days. And maybe I'm only interested in what's going on in Missouri. I can come in and select my state and just apply this to Missouri. And if I wanted to take the step further and only look at specific markets within Missouri, I could do that as well. But I'm going to leave it just for kind of a statewide average for Missouri. I'm going to go ahead and refine it for cattle and feeder cattle in particular. And we're going to look at both steers and heifers. And again, I may only have interest in a particular weight grouping, so I'm going to run from 500 to 800 pounds. Now that allows me to kind of refine this information, and I'm going to come through here. Again, we have these little plus signs within each column header that allows us to expand the information set and break it out based on class, as well as our frame score and muscle score, so forth and so on. I'm just going to go ahead and stop there for now. One thing that has been of great interest lately is the percentage of heifer marketing. And NASS does a great job with their cattle on feed reports. And one particular number that they're looking for in many of those cattle on feed reports is the percentage of heifers that are in the current inventory of cattle on feed. Because as we witnessed back in 2014, when we last saw a significant herd reduction, and most of this is brought on by drought and El Nino, La Nina cycles, like we mentioned earlier, and there was an earlier session on that. But in any regard, as the plains dry out, we don't have the forage to keep animals and the herd reduces. And when we see that herd reduction, it goes through a tightening phase and a inventory situation, a supply situation that oftentimes will advance prices. And it takes time because the cattle cycle is much longer than the poultry or pork cycle. So it takes a lot of time for us to rebuild the herd, have those animals actually produce another calf, and build that inventory within the feedlots for marketing. And what we're looking for is an indicator as to when we're starting to retain more heifers to increase production. So going into that herd rebuilding phase is more or less when we see 40% or less heifers within those feedlots. So we kind of took that information on what folks look for in the feedlots and we applied it to marketing. So what are people marketing through the auction markets? So we took a percentage number broken out between steers and heifers to kind of understand, okay, what volume of data is coming from solely from heifers. So if we come in here, we see that the heifer marketing is currently, and I need to shrink some of this to get this, so bear with me here. We see roughly in Missouri, 47% of the marketed supply is heifers. So we're still seeing quite a bit of heifer marketing, which would probably indicate that we're not seeing a lot of herd rebuilding currently taking place within Missouri, just based on the data that we have available within this dashboard. Again, there's other sources of data that's going to tell a larger story, but we may see state by state variance. So another state in which this is focused on heavily would be Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, we see a difference here. We dropped to 42% marketing of the marketed supply being heifers. And again, this is only within the last 30 days. So if we expand this out a little bit further, maybe 180 days, it would tell us a little bit different story. And within the 180 days, we're seeing more or less a 50-50 marketing in Oklahoma, which means a lot of these producers, we could guess that we're probably going to have an roughly equal number of steers and heifers that are being produced from a cow-calf herd. And it looks like they're marketing every one of those animals and not retaining any of them. So that's what we're seeing over the last 180 days. But as we get closer here to the fall, we're seeing that number of heifer marketings drop to 42%, which may be an indication that folks do have the forage to retain more heifers and are retaining more for the herd. So just another piece of information that you can actually extrapolate from these dashboards. The last tile here that I have to show you guys for this session is just a more or less historical mapping of cattle prices across multiple classes. So currently, not a whole lot of movement in the last 30 days, but this graph becomes a little bit more meaningful if we pull in multiple years worth of data. So over the last 3 years, through this herd reduction phase that we've been experiencing over the last 3 years, we saw feeder cattle prices advance. And like I said, a lot of that has to do with less cattle being available to market. It's more supply driven, I guess, than it would be demand driven. And we see that, really come to light last fall, fall of 2022. We saw steady advancement coming along. And then as we entered into the new calendar year of 2023, we saw a pretty rapid advancement in feeder cattle prices. And each one of these depict a different class. So the top line is our steers. The next line down is our heifers, then our bulls, and then our dairy steers and dairy heifers. One note I would like to make on this, and I'm going to take cows out. These are feeding cows, not really a particular commodity of interest to most folks, and we can toggle that off by just simply clicking on it. One thing I do want to note, because there's a growing interest in a lot of crossbreds. In response to the herd reduction, the dairy industry has been crossing their cows with more beef genetics in order to help offset some of the reduction in inventory that we see from native type steers. So in response to that, our market news division plans to start capturing some of that value within those crossbred classes to kind of understand where they fit in along those graphs as far as pricing is concerned. And that's all I have for today. So I don't know if we have the ability to access some of these questions that might have come through.
I'm not seeing any right now, Levi.
Okay.
You might just briefly just show on this one page that, the overlay that's built in on each page. If people have any questions on what's being relayed, you might just show them that while we're seeing if there's anybody has questions.
Are you talking about on this first landing page here?
Yes. We do. One question did pop up asking about equine. So I'll let you.
On equine?
Marketing, yeah.
Currently, we do not provide any market information on equine. So we're mainly focused on edible-based commodities, edible for the U.S. I know equine's consumed in other regions across the world, but these are more consumed commodities that are more mainstream in the agricultural sector. So unfortunately, we do not have any market information on equines.
The question mark at the top right corner, Levi, if you click on it, and it may take a minute for it to show up.
Okay. Yes, so the question, just so everybody's aware, is as AMS markets, tracks markets approved for equine, are you able to add equine to this list of visualizations? I understand the data is very limited. And yes, the data is limited. We don't collect anything other than what we're seeing as far as movement across the border. We do track some of that as it moves in and out of the United States. As far as the destinations, it's unsure. We just know what's coming into the U.S. and out of the U.S. So unfortunately, we can't incorporate that into this dashboard. If the data was available and more readily available, then yes. With Tableau, we can pull in multiple data sets so long as we can match them up with the hierarchy of data that we currently are using. So we are able to import data into these visualizations, but the data has to exist. And unfortunately, we don't have that data available to us. Do we have any further questions? Or is there any other information folks would like to see through this? I kind of ran through it relatively quickly, but some of the most enjoyable things with demoing these dashboards is the level of interactive discussion that you can have and what it's capable of pulling.
So we have another question there, Levi, asking what day is the data updated? Currently, I'll take that one. So currently, we're doing this on a manual refresh. So currently we're doing it Every first thing Monday morning, so around 6:30, 7:30 Central. We are working through a pilot project we're hopefully to automate the data refresh process, and hopefully we get it down to a daily refresh. But currently it's every Monday morning around 6:30, 7 Central.
Okay, well, to make use of time, since we have people till the top of the hour, I want to give just a quick little peek at another dashboard we developed. As mentioned earlier, we're aiming to provide dashboards for multiple different commodities that are marketed through various different forms. So the marketing channel that this one reflects is that of livestock auctions. There's a lot of cattle that are traded direct, and those aren't incorporated within this dashboard. And there's a lot of livestock that's sold over video auctions, and it's not incorporated within this dashboard. So there's different marketing channels that we can capture, as well as different commodities. And, one thing that we've had the ability to do, as Mike Sheets mentioned earlier, was produce dashboards for a cattle contract library, as well as for QAD for grading information. Now, you'll have to forgive me because I have not rehearsed any of these, but we are going to take a look so that you do know that they're available. And if you want to access any of these dashboards, you can simply come to My Market News. If you Google My Market News in a web browser, it'll provide the link and it will bring you to this page. You'll see here about midway down the page, you have dashboards and visualizations. You can click view, and here's our dashboard. So we have the QAD and the livestock, poultry, and grain market news visualizations. And I'm going to jump to this QAD one. Michael, do we have the one for the cattle contract library, or was that kind of expired since pilot?
No, go back. It's under the LP page, livestock, poultry, right there. No.
Oh, there we go. So one thing of great interest over the past several years is how are a lot of the trades being formulated that are being traded direct, from cattle feeders to our large packers. And we ran a pilot project over the last year, or maybe it's been 2 years, to try to capture some of this without really disclosing anybody's particular position within the marketplace, because we do value the confidentiality of the sources providing the information. And through this pilot, we were able to uncover some pretty interesting information on some of the trade that's occurring between your large feeders, or any feeder for that matter, and your large packers. And in this understanding, what we found out that about 78% of those marketing arrangements are being developed off of USDA reports that are being generated through our division. So, that was a pretty interesting find. We also found out that roughly about 13% of those were actually negotiated contracts. Some were based off of the top of the market. So, depending on what the purchases were for a particular time period, they're just advancing that price so many dollars per hundredweight. And then some are based off the CME futures that we see and are available to the CME website. So this is another visualization that you can kind of come in and explore. It's available to everybody. It does give you kind of a greater understanding of how the trades being developed across some of the direct trades that may seem like it's going on behind the scenes, but it is, available for folks that really kind of want to understand what those contracts are based on. And again, it has the same navigation principles as our livestock auction dashboard. You can come to these different tiles and you can get more enhanced information, whether price adjustments were applied to some of these contracts, what the base source was. So again, we said about 77% were based off of USDA reports, whether they actually applied premium and discounts. And much of that is based on you know, whether they grade choice, prime, select, their yield grade, different carcass merit characteristics that they may apply some type of premium or discount upon. You know, the clear majority, roughly 94%, are applying some type of premium and discount. So a lot of good information here that you can also access. Again, this is just one of the 3 dashboards we have available through AMS, and there's multiple other dashboards. As you've seen, NASS has their dashboard. So this has allowed us, you know, really to take all this data and information that we've historically put through these very mundane static reports. And then again, there's thousands of them. It's hard to find the information you're needing. This just allows us to pull into all those data sources and bring it to life within a relatively simple to use dashboard.
On this particular dashboard, one different approach we took here that we don't, you know, normally we collect the data, we publish the data, we publish a report, right? And then you guys can go look at the hard report or pull the data down as you see. With this pilot in this particular dashboard, we aren't publishing the report. We're gathering data, we're aggregating it, publishing it to the dashboard. So up top, you'll see there's a publish date, so you can actually scroll through. It's kind of like the date filter, Levi. So that date filter is a snapshot, not that one.
Oh.
The date filter on the left.
Excuse me.
So this would be, you know, these are all snapshots in time. So basically that's every time we did a publish, which is on a weekly basis in this case. So it's a snapshot in time. So we're going straight from gathering the data and pushing it straight to a dashboard. There is no, you know, reports in this case. This is the report. It's a dynamic tool. So that's one thing that we've been looking at, you know, going forward.
And since we have a few more minutes just for a preview, we do have our QAD meat grading dashboard as well that gives a better understanding of the grading percentages that are currently taking place across the nation. So another interactive dashboard that's available to folks that kind of maps out all the different merits and factors that go into pricing a lot of our slaughter cattle. Okay, well, I will stop the share here. I appreciate everybody's time for tuning in. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you have the time to go into those dashboards and play around with them. Again, I did want to share our contact information here, so give me just a second. And if you wish to reach out to us, you certainly may. And on the panel here, we have myself, Levi Geyer, as well as Michael Jeter and David Garcia. You can access any of those dashboards through the link provided below. So again, feel free to email us, and we will certainly get back with you with any questions that you might have. All right, thank you.